It was a whirlwind of emotions, everything happening so fast, and suddenly, there I was, caught in the crossfire of a family explosion. My father, 50, had just filed for divorce from Sharon, my stepmother. She was 44, and I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me, the blame being unfairly shifted onto my shoulders. How did I become the villain in all of this? The truth was, I wasn't at all surprised by the drama. Sharon and I had never really seen eye to eye. It wasn't that we outright hated each other, but there was this invisible wall between us, one I couldn't ignore. She was never the kind of person I'd have chosen for my dad. Shallow? Pretentious? Those were words that often came to mind when I thought of her. She entered our lives when I was just 16, marrying my dad after dating for a few years. During those early days, I saw right through her. She was nice, sure, but it felt like she was just playing a role, trying to be the perfect girlfriend, doting on the daughter of the man she was seeing. My dad, blinded by love, was happy. So, I kept quiet. No need to rock the boat for something so petty, right? But now, with the divorce in full swing, I couldn't help but feel a wave of regret wash over me. What if I had spoken up? What if I had told him how uncomfortable I was with the way Sharon tried so hard to fit into our lives, changing things that my mother had once cared about? You see, my mother had passed away when I was just 7 years old, a tragic car accident that left a void in my heart and my father's. Yet Sharon, who was supposed to be my dad's partner, seemed to struggle with my mom's memory, slowly but surely erasing any trace of her from our home. It started innocently enough, changing the decor here and there, replacing things my mom had picked out. I couldn't help but feel a pang each time I saw one of those changes. Sharon had been living with us for a year before the wedding, but that didn't prepare me for what came next. The wallpaper, the little trinkets that my mother had loved, gone. But the final blow came when Sharon convinced my dad to move all my mother's clothes into the attic. As if they were just things to be stored away, out of sight, out of mind. And then, the pictures. The family photos. Gone, too. She said it made her uncomfortable to see them. That was the turning point for me. I fought back, but my dad said this was our new family, that my mother would want everyone to feel happy. It wasn't an easy pill to swallow, but I let it go. Still, I knew Sharon was trying to replace my mom. Could I understand her feeling threatened? Sure. She must have felt like she was competing with a ghost, with someone who could never be replaced. But was that really her fight to have? My mom was gone, and Sharon had my dad all to herself. So why the need to try so hard? Why couldn't she accept that she would never be my mom? I never asked her to be. Instead, she tried to act like her, like she could be a mother figure. But her definition of motherhood? It was about control, about pushing herself into every aspect of my life. She thought it would endear her to me, but all it did was frustrate me. The unsolicited advice, the constant reminders that I was doing things wrong. I was 16, not a child. And yet, Sharon treated me like I was 5, as though I couldn't think for myself. I mean, how could I possibly take advice from someone who didn't even have a college degree? Every conversation felt like a lecture. She'd belittle me, talk down to me as if I didn't understand anything. It was infuriating. She wasn't coming from a place of concern, of love, just from a place of wanting to make me feel small. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to speak up. Stop! You're not my mother, and you never will be. You don't need to act like one. It was hard, but I had to make it clear that I wasn't going to accept her constant overbearing behavior. It worked, for a while. But Sharon wasn't the type to let things go. The condescension didn't stop, just the pretending to be my mom. She found new ways to get under my skin. And if that wasn't bad enough, she'd drag my dad into it, using him as an ally in her twisted power play. My dad was a good man, but this was never something he should have been involved in. At one point, when I was 17, I had an issue at school with a girl who was being nasty to me for no reason. I vented to my friends, but somehow, Sharon found out. And instead of talking to me directly, she had my dad intervene. He was getting involved in something that wasn't his business. But Sharon couldn't help herself. She had to be in control, even if it meant causing more tension. It was like a nightmare coming to life the moment I realized my dad had been sent by Sharon to talk to me. And though it was his voice, all I could hear were her words pouring out of his mouth, like they were his own. It was surreal, like some twisted echo of everything she'd ever said to me. Then, when I was gearing up to apply to colleges, she had the audacity to bring it up at a party my dad threw to celebrate the college I had been accepted into. I remember her casually mentioning how she had expected me to pick a better college. I mean, who does that? She was just the most exasperating person to deal with, and the moment I moved out, I couldn't have been happier. It didn't take long after I left for college to realize I wasn't coming back home except for the holidays. I was avoiding her at all costs. Even when I did go back, there she was, still acting like I was a child, despite being an adult woman. And honestly, I wouldn't say we had a terrible relationship, but it certainly wasn't a good one. If you're asking me, I never liked her. Fast forward to more recently. Sharon invited me to my dad's 50th birthday party. It was going to be big. She'd invited all his friends, most of our family, even my maternal grandparents, which was unusual because she'd always been so hostile toward the fact that my dad kept in touch with his ex-in-laws. The party was set for one of my dad's favorite restaurants, a place he loved, so I had to give her credit for that. She even went so far as to tell me that she wanted to have a conversation a couple of days before the event. To be honest, I was skeptical. We hadn't spoken in years, so I couldn't imagine there was anything she could want from me. Still, I agreed to meet her because, somehow, it felt important. So, 3 days ago, I met her at a coffee shop near my house. The moment we sat down, she was her usual self, acting as if I was a toddler who couldn't be trusted with any real conversation. People around us were definitely giving us some strange looks. Honestly, you'd think I'd made this up if I didn't have all these people witnessing her bizarre behavior. After a few moments of small talk, she dropped a bombshell. I wasn't allowed to bring my husband to the party. Yes, you heard that right. She straight up told me that my husband, Jason, wasn't welcome. The reason she gave was not only degrading but completely dehumanizing. I couldn't even believe she said it, much less expected me to just accept it. Jason and I have been together since we were in 8th grade. He's my high school sweetheart, my soulmate. We've been married for 2 years, and not once did I ever think anyone would question our bond. We're a package deal. Jason has had epilepsy since childhood, and while he takes medication, it doesn't stop the occasional seizure. I've always supported him, and I expect others to show the same level of compassion. So when Sharon told me I couldn't bring him to the party because she feared he might have a seizure in front of everyone, I was floored. It wasn't just insensitive, it was ableism at its worst. I had to fight with every ounce of control in me not to throw my coffee in her face. Instead, I just stood up, walked out, and got in my car, trying to hold myself together. When I got home, I didn't even think twice. I declined the invitation and blocked Sharon without a second thought. I was shaking with anger, trying to keep my composure, but I couldn't hold back the tears. This was my dad's birthday, for crying out loud. Yes, Sharon was organizing it, but that didn't give her the right to humiliate me, especially not about the one person in my life I loved more than anyone. She knew how much I loved Jason. She'd seen us together for years. And yet, she thought it was okay to treat him like he was less than human because of his condition. I spent the next few hours on the couch, crying silently, hoping Jason wouldn't hear me. But of course, he did. He rushed to my side, and I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told him everything Sharon had said and explained how it felt like I was being torn between my father and the woman he had married. Sharon had never respected my boundaries, never understood my feelings, and now, it seemed like I was going to have to choose between them altogether. I had tried talking to my father before about how Sharon had always infantilized me, how she would push me around and treat me like a child. He always said it came from a place of love, that she was just concerned about me, especially when I was a teenager. But this was different. This wasn't about love. This was about disrespect. Jason was my husband, and that should have been enough. But now, it felt like I was being forced into an impossible situation. Jason comforted me, and after I stopped crying, he said something that cut through all my anger. He told me he was used to people saying things like that about him. He'd never felt the weight of his own actions quite like this before. It was heartbreaking, but it had also taken a toll on him more than he was willing to admit. Jason had gotten used to people's harsh words, their judgments, and assumptions. But this was different. He saw the anger in my eyes, the hurt that I couldn't hide. It was time to confront my father. The issue had escalated beyond small irritations. This was something that couldn't be brushed under the rug anymore. I needed to talk to him, and I couldn't put it off any longer. The conversation had lingered in my mind, and I couldn't shake the anger that still burned in me. I'd already declined Sharon's invitation. She knew she crossed a line, but that wasn't enough. It was time to hold her accountable. So, I called my father. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but they were honest. I couldn't pretend like everything was fine anymore. I told him how deeply hurt I was by what Sharon had said about Jason. I couldn't just pretend it didn't matter. I explained to him that I couldn't attend his birthday celebration, and I couldn't keep pretending that things were okay between us. Sharon's comment had left an imprint that couldn't be ignored. The disrespect, the humiliation, it wasn't something I could just let go of. She had crossed a line, and now, I needed to make sure he understood that. I knew he loved her, but I couldn't stand by and let her tear us apart. The years of frustration, all the small jabs and insults, poured out of me. I told him how she treated me like a child for so long, how it wasn't because she cared, but because she wanted control. Sharon had always had a way of asserting herself in ways that made me feel small. And this latest move? It was the last straw. My father listened, patiently. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to defend her. When I finished, he didn't argue. Instead, he apologized. He understood why I was upset, and he recognized how wrong Sharon had been. He admitted it. He understood that what she said about Jason was unforgivable. And for the first time, it felt like I wasn't fighting this battle alone. My father, too, was acknowledging how much she had hurt us. He promised to talk to Sharon, to make her apologize. For the first time in so long, I felt like he might actually do something about it. I hung up the phone with a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted. Jason and I tried to forget about it, tried to get back to our day. But when I woke up the next morning, things had taken a turn I wasn't prepared for. A message from my aunt, of all people, had me reeling. Apparently, my father had filed for divorce from Sharon. The shock hit me like a tidal wave. I hadn't seen it coming, not at all. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I called him immediately. When he picked up, his voice was calm but worn out. I filed for divorce, he told me, without preamble. He said he was living in a hotel, away from the house. He wanted to see me. So, without hesitation, I drove straight there. I found him sitting in his room, looking older, weary. Before I could say anything, he hugged me, and in that moment, I realized how much he had been holding in. He apologized. The weight of his words was heavier than I expected. He admitted that he had put his own happiness before mine, that he had been blind to how bad things had gotten with Sharon. He told me that he had tried to convince himself that she was good for him, but he couldn't deny it anymore. He was trapped in his own delusions. He explained how Sharon had become more and more controlling over the years. It was all about her insecurity, her jealousy of my mother. It wasn't just the past year, it had been festering for a long time. Every argument, every little insult, every accusation she'd thrown at him. And it had only gotten worse. He had tried to reassure her, tried to tell her that he loved her, but it wasn't enough for her. And now, after everything, Sharon had finally crossed the line. She humiliated me, humiliated Jason, and there was no turning back. He described how, when he confronted her about what she'd said to me, her response had been a victim's plea. She refused to accept any responsibility. She didn't feel bad. She claimed that she was only trying to help, but there was no help in her words. Only cruelty. When he told her that Jason had to be at the party, she had gotten defensive. The conversation spiraled, and he finally couldn't take it anymore. He walked out. As he spoke, I could see the regret in his eyes. This wasn't the man I had known for most of my life. He was finally facing the reality of the situation. Sharon wasn't just controlling, she was toxic, and he had finally admitted it. But it was too late to undo the damage. Too many years had been wasted, too many chances had been missed. He was done. That evening, my father made his decision. He packed his things, left the house, and checked into a hotel. He didn't waste time, his lawyer was called, and the divorce papers were already in the works. The 2 days of silence between us weren't because he didn't care, but because he was ashamed. Ashamed of how everything had gone down, ashamed that he had failed me as a father. The weight of the conversation we had that night was immense, but necessary. We both knew it had been a long time coming. Once everything was laid bare, the truth hung heavy in the air between us. But there was still love. Despite the turmoil, despite the heartbreak, I loved my father. And he loved me. He admitted his faults and his selfishness, and for the first time, we could start to fix our fractured bond. The moment he announced that he had filed for divorce in the family group chat, I knew I was the last one to find out. It felt strange, being the last to know, but I understood. I wasn't a part of the endless group chat that consumed their messages. I was someone who preferred face-to-face connections. The only thing that mattered now was that it was done. He was determined, unwavering in his decision. Still, the relief didn't last long. Hours after that phone call with my dad, my phone buzzed again. It was Sharon. From a different number. And the tirade she unleashed was brutal. She didn't waste any time accusing me, blaming me for everything. For ruining her marriage. For wanting to tear their family apart. The words she hurled at me were confusing, disorienting. She claimed that I had always resented her because I worshipped my mother and couldn't stand the idea of someone else filling her role. The irony, though, was thick. My father had dated other women after my mom passed, and I had never been upset. Sharon was nothing special in that regard. Then came her explanation for the party incident, the thing that had set everything off. She had told me that Jason couldn't come because she was trying to protect us from embarrassment. The sheer audacity. She was drunk, stumbling through her words, trying to explain away her cruelty as though she was the victim in all of this. I felt a strange mix of pity and disgust. It was a phone call that left me unsettled, unsure of what to make of her. Her emotional turmoil seemed real, but her actions didn't justify it. Days passed, and I kept reminding myself that I hadn't done anything wrong. She had brought this on herself. I was just trying to live my life, protect my husband, and be there for my father. Sharon, however, was caught up in her own insecurities and projection. And I realized I had nothing to apologize for. Jason and my father both stood by me. They knew I had done the right thing by speaking up. The words Sharon said about Jason and his epilepsy were inexcusable. She had crossed a line, and frankly, she'd been crossing it for years. Since I was 13, she had treated me with disdain, trying to belittle me, trying to prove her dominance. And finally, it seemed like she was being called out for her behavior. It was about time. But life wasn't pausing, and my dad called me the day after. He said the birthday party would still happen. Sharon had already used his credit card to pay for everything, so the event would go on. No matter what, Jason and I would be attending. It was happening in 3 days, and we were already planning to go. Therapy was on the table for Jason and me. He thought it was a good idea, and so did I. We needed help to work through the tension. But one thing was for sure, we were both committed to making things better. The day of the party arrived, and I wasn't sure what to expect. The air was thick with everything that had happened, but when the music started, it felt like a weight was lifted. It was like we could pretend for a moment that things weren't falling apart. My father and I laughed, danced, and even had a bit too much to drink. It felt like a rare moment of joy, like the carefree days from my childhood. For the first time in a long while, I felt like everything could be okay. And then came the next update. Sharon finally responded to the divorce petition. Surprisingly, she didn't contest it. But she demanded a hefty sum in alimony. She thought she deserved it, but I didn't feel the same. That wasn't something I could control. The legal proceedings were underway, and I couldn't help but hope that the divorce didn't get ugly. On a brighter note, my dad and I had started therapy. The sessions were going well. And we had decided to commit to weekly lunches or dinners, just the two of us, to rebuild what had been broken. It felt like we were slowly finding our way back to each other. And maybe, just maybe, we'd make it through this storm stronger than before.